Hi, hello everyone, hello English readers, and welcome to this live read along of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. Thank you for watching it. I'm Lydie Bureau, and I am an English teacher in France. I'm also the founder of Lydie's Book Club, which is a book club in which I host live readings like this one of adaptations of classics of English literature, but also contemporary novels. Hi, Kitty, welcome. And I tend to prioritize books that are written by women. So with the members of my book club, we choose the next books that we're going to read. And in this month of April, we have decided to read Mrs. Dalloway. So once a week, I meet the members of the book club by Zoom to discuss the chapters read over the week. And we also talk about books in general and learning English. Today, we're going to read the third section of the novel, or the third part. So basically, we're going to read page 25 to 38. So if you want to know more about Mrs. Dalloway and Virginia Woolf, its author, then I invite you to watch, the podcast episode that I have recorded live last week, actually, and it's going to be available next week on Spotify. Yes, so if you're following me, then you will have access to it. You will get the link to have access to this podcast. So this book is an adaptation for English learners at upper intermediate level. So it's for B2 level. But if you have a B1 level, that can be a nice challenge for you. And if you have if you're more advanced, it's still a good read because maybe the original book might be a little bit difficult to read. It's not an easy read because it's very specific style of writing, and that could be a good start to have an overview of the book, and then you can start reading, or maybe that will give you the confidence to read the original book. So that is if you have an advanced level in English. Yeah. So without further ado, I'm going to start doing a quick recap of the second section. So the part that we read yesterday. And yesterday it was about Septimus Warren Smith, who is the second main character of the story. And we meet this character and his wife, Rizia, who is originally from Italy. And they are also on Bond Street, similarly to Clarissa. They are passing by while there is this car that we think that is that the Prime Minister is inside. So everyone is intrigued in front of this car that it's stopped at in the middle of Bond Street. Hi, hello. And so they are in the street, and they are on their way to Regent's Park. But Septimus is staring at the car. He doesn't move anymore. And his wife is trying to wake him up and tell him that, okay, we need to cross over now. Let's move on. But Septimus is in his own mind, in his own thoughts, and he's not really listening to her. And Reason manages to shake him and, okay, come on, let's go. And eventually they cross over to Regent's Park and in direction to Regent's Park. And there they sit on a bench, or they call it, in the text, it's called chair, but it's probably a bench or something. So they're sitting on this bench, and they are looking at the sky, and they're both in their own world, especially Septimus. He is thinking there is an airplane that is writing something in the air, like it's a commercial for toffee. And they're looking at the plane, they're looking at people, and in the park. And Rizia is thinking about her husband and how solitary, how alone she feels, and how hard it is for her to understand her husband, and how lonely she feels, not being able to talk about it with her family, her friends, because nobody is really listening to, or nobody is really ready to listen to her and ready to hear what she's going through, probably. So she feels very lonely, and in her mind comes back the doctor's, Dr. Holmes' instructions, about the fact that, oh, he should take some fresh air, or he should, at some point, it's about cricket, or your husband just needs to have some distractions, basically, to play cricket, or to be yeah, or to do some activities. It's not, he's not really understanding her husband's condition, and I think deep down so she's following his instructions, but but somehow it doesn't seem to be very useful, or I don't, to me it feels like she doesn't really, I think that she deep down she thinks that it's not really helping in a way, or I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it's the thing is, at some point there is this lady, this young woman, Maisie Johnson, and she's also passing by in the park. She's trying to find her way, and she sees Rizia and, this couple acting strangely. And the fact that also Rizia is trying to make sure that nobody sees that her husband is acting strange. She, in her way to hide her husband's behavior, she is acting herself in a strange way, you see. So as much as she's trying to hide his sickness, she is making herself like a fool, you see, towards you know, in the eyes of people passing by, you see. So as much as she's trying, as Rizia is trying her best to make things as normal, or to pretend like everything is all right, and or she's trying to hide as much as she can her husband's odd behavior, odd, strange behavior. Um, it's hard for her, especially that her husband also talk about killing himself. So it's a very lonely place in which she is. And on the other hand, Septimus doesn't, and also the fact that she sees that her husband is not the same anymore. He's not the one that she used to know. He's not looking at her anymore. He's not listening to her when she's talking. And it's more like she's bothering him. Towards the end, oh, he'll say, oh, interrupted again. She was always interrupting. So Septimus is in his own world, and every time that Rizia is trying to bring him back to earth, then it's an interruption for him, or it's annoying, yeah, for him. He would rather to be left alone, or to not be interrupted in his thoughts and in his thinking. So yeah, that was a chapter that felt I felt very sorry in this, very sorry for Razia in this chapter. And here it gives a little bit of understanding of how the helpers usually, you know, when you have in a couple or a family member, a parent that is sick, whether if it's physically or mentally sick, how hard and how much a struggle it is for people living with these with them every day, and the people that are taking care of them. So in that sense, this novel is very, Virginia Woolf is showing here an interesting view on people that are helping or caring for sick people, you see, family members and or husbands or wives. This is part of, I think, why this novel is also it has become a classic as well, and by the topics that it approaches as well. It's a very new thing. In this novel was published in 1925, so it's very innovative. It's very new. Okay, so that's the end for the recap of the first section. And I remind you that if you haven't watched the first part of the book, then you can listen to the live reading on my YouTube channel. Okay, let's start. What are people looking at up in the sky? Clarissa Dalloway asked Lucy, reaching her own front door and stepping inside. The whole of the house was as cool as a church. The door closed, and Mrs. Dalloway felt the life of her house wrap comfortably around her, bending her head gratefully over the whole table. She took the note with the telephone message on it, while Lucy stood beside her, trying to explain. Mrs. Dalloway, Madame, Clarissa read the note. Lady Bourton wishes to know if Mr. Dalloway will have lunch with her today. Mrs. Dalloway, Madame, Mr. Dalloway, Madame, told me to tell you he would be having lunch out, said Lucy. Oh dear, said Clarissa, and Lucy shared her disappointment and felt the understanding between them. Clarissa trembled, for the shock of Lady Bourton asking Richard to lunch without her shook the moment. Militant Bourton, whose lunch parties were said to be extraordinarily amusing, had not asked her. Simply jealousy could not separate her from Richard, but she feared time itself, and read on Lady Bourton's face, as if it had been cut in stone, the fading of her own life year by year. She put down the note and began to go slowly upstairs, as if she had left a party, and stood alone against the awful night, instead of against the stare of this soft June morning. She paused by the open window on the stairs. She felt herself suddenly older, dried up. Her body and brain now failed, because Lady Bourton, whose lunch parties were said to be extraordinarily amusing, had not asked her. Feels a little bit jealous here. Because she asked her husband to go to the party instead. So she went upstairs, paused at the window, came to her attic room. Here was an emptiness at the heart of life, an attic room. Attic is the room usually to explain, it's farmhouses, so it's at the very top. It's usually when you can't even stand you can only stand straight. You see, you have to bend usually because the roof is very low. So it's that room of the house, and usually you put old boxes. It can, and sometimes it can be used as room, but usually it's kind of a place where you're gonna put all your boxes, and it's usually quite full of dust and a little bit dirty. That's the attic. Here was an emptiness at the heart of life, an attic room. So that's why she uses this image, the emptiness of a heart at the heart of a life. So it's part of the house, but there is nobody goes in the attic room usually. It's not necessarily empty, but in a sense of there is nobody goes there in this room. White sheets were stretched tight around the narrow bed, for Richard had to stay so late at the House of Commons that she must sleep undisturbed, she said, after her illness. So her room was an attic, and the bed narrow with a book beside it. So maybe it's a very clean attic in this house, but it's just it depends. Sometimes the attic can be rearranged and used as a room, as a bedroom or a guest bedroom. So a room was an attic, and the bed narrow with a book beside it. She knew what was missing in her. It was something central, something warm, a warm wave that broke up the cold contact of man and woman, or between women too. She had a coldness about her which attached itself to her like a sheet. Yet there were times she did feel it, only for a moment, but it was enough, a sudden spark which spread and rushed through her. But this question of love, she thought, taking off her yellow hat and laying it on the bed, this falling in love with women like Sally Seton, had not that, after all, been love? She's questioning love here. What is love? Sally sat on the floor. That was her first memory of Sally, smoking a cigarette. Where could it have been? At some party, she supposed. For Clarissa remembered the man she was with, telling her who it was. He told her that Sally's parents did not get on. How that shocked her, the idea that one's parents should quarrel. But all that evening, she could not take her eyes off Sally. It was an extraordinary beauty of the kind she most admired. Dark, large-eyed, with that quality Clarissa wished she had herself, that she could say anything, do anything. Perhaps it was that summer that Sally came to stay at Bourton, rushing off after some argument at home, walking in quite unexpectedly one evening after dinner. It upset poor Aunt Elena so much that she never forgave her. That night, she and Sally had sat up half the night talking. It was Sally who made her feel for the first time how little she knew. She knew nothing about sex, nothing about social problems. That summer, they sat, hour after hour, talking in her bedroom about life, about how they were going to change the world, though the idea were Sally's, of course. That means that it's mainly Sally who wanted to change the world than Clarissa. Hi, Nika. Sally's power was amazing. There was what she did. There was what she did with flowers, for example. At Bourton, there were always stiff little bunches all the way down the dinner table. But Sally picked all sorts of flowers from the garden that had never been seen together, cut their heads off, and made them swim on the top of water in bowls. The effect was extraordinary. Then, one night, she forgot her towel and ran along the corridor naked, shocking Aunt Elena. Indeed, she did shock people. The strange thing, looking back, was how pure her feeling for Sally was. It was not like one's feeling for a man. She could remember standing in her bedroom, saying aloud, "She's beneath this roof." The words meant nothing at all to her now, but she could remember going cold with excitement, doing her hair, and now the old feeling began to come back to her as she put her hand down to her hair. It was a feeling of pure joy, coming down to dinner in a white dress to meet Sally Seton, who seemed all light. After dinner, Aunt Elena wandered off. Sally stood by the window, talking in her beautiful voice to Papa, who had begun to be attracted to her without intending to be. He never forgot lending her one of his books and finding that she had left it out in the rain. Peter Walsh was there, and old Joseph Brightcop, who came every summer to teach Clarissa German. Suddenly, Sally said, "What a pity to sit indoors." And they went out into the garden. Peter and Joseph Brightcop talked about German music. She and Sally walked a little behind them. Then came the most beautiful moment of her whole life. Passing a stone pot with flowers in it, Sally stopped, picked a flower, kissed her on the lips. The whole world seemed to have turned upside down. The others disappeared. She was alone with Sally, and she felt that she had been given some extraordinary treasure, like a diamond, and told just to keep it, not to look at it. Then old Joseph and Peter turned to face them. "Stargazing?" said Peter. "It was shocking. It was terrible. It was horrible. It was like running into a stone wall in the darkness." But she did not mind for herself. She felt only how Sally was being attacked. She saw Peter's jealousy, his wish to break into their friendship. But Sally continued on her way, undefeated. She made old Joseph tell her the names of the stars. Never had she admired Sally so much. She stood there. She listened to Joseph telling Sally the names of the stars. "Oh, this horror," she said to herself, as if she had known all the time that something would interrupt her moment of happiness. When she thought of Peter, she always thought of their quarrels, because she wanted him to think well of her, perhaps. Yet, how much she owed Peter later. He gave her words that guarded her life, like sentimental. A book was sentimental. An opinion was sentimental. Perhaps she was sentimental now to be thinking of the past. What would he think, she wondered, when he came back? Would he think that she had grown older? Would he say that, or would she see him thinking it? It was true. Since her illness, her hair had turned almost white. Sitting at her table in front of the mirror, an icy shock went through her. She was not old yet. She had just passed her 51st birthday. Months and months after her 52nd year were still untouched. And as if to catch the falling moment, Clarissa plunged into the very heart of it, the moment of this June morning, as she gazed into the small pink face of the woman who was to give a party that very night, of Clarissa Dalloway, of herself. How many million times she had seen her face in the mirror, always with the same tightness of her lips. That was herself, pointed like an arrow and certain. That was herself when, with effort, she gathered the parts together into one center, one woman who was there for others. She had helped the lonely, perhaps, young people were grateful to her. She had tried always to be the same, never showing a sign of all the other sides of her failings, doubts, and jealousies. Like this of Lady Bourton not asking her to lunch. She brushed her hair at last. Now, where was her dress? Her evening dresses hung in the cupboard. Clarissa, plunging her hand into the softness, gently took out the silvery green dress and carried it to the window to examine it. She had torn it. She remembered someone stepping on the skirt at a party. She would mend it herself. Her servants had too much to do. She would take it downstairs to the drawing room and sew it there, for she needed to check that all was well for the party. It was strange, she thought, pausing at the top of the stairs, how well a woman knows the mood of her house. Quiet, purposeful sounds reached her from downstairs. A brush moving across the floor, voices repeating messages, clean silver bowls, and candlesticks being carried on a tray. All was for the party. And Lucy went into the drawing room with her tray and put the huge silver candlesticks on the table. Here the guests would later stand and talk, she thought. And of all those people, her Mrs. Dalloway was the loveliest. "Oh, Lucy," said Mrs. Dalloway, coming into the drawing room, "the silver does look nice." And Lucy stopped at the drawing room door and said very shyly, "Couldn't she help to mend that dress?" "But," said Mrs. Dalloway, "Lucy had more than enough work to do already without that." "But thank you, Lucy. Oh, thank you," said Mrs. Dalloway. "And thank you," she went on saying, sitting down on the sofa with the green dress over her knees, grateful to her servants for helping her to be what she wanted, gentle, generous-hearted. Her servants liked her. Now, where was the dress store? Quiet fell on her as she sewed, gathering the folds of silk smoothly together. So on a summer's day, the waves gather, rise and fall, and the whole world seems to be saying, "That is all." That is all, the heart repeats. Fear no more. And the body alone listens to the wave breaking, the dog barking, far away, barking and barking. "Good heavens, the front door bell!" cried Clarissa. Looking up, she listened. "Mrs. Dalloway will see me," said the grey-haired man in the hall. "Oh, yes. After I've been in India for 5 years, Clarissa will see me," he said, putting Lucy aside very kindly and running upstairs. "Who can it be?" asked Mrs. Dalloway. How shocking it was to be interrupted at 11 o'clock in the morning, on the day she was giving a party. She wanted to hide her sewing. Now the door opened, and in came, for a second, she could not remember what he was called, being so shocked, so pleased to have Peter Walsh come to visit her without warning. "And how are you?" said Peter Walsh, trembling, taking both her hands and kissing them. "She's grown older," he thought, sitting down beside her. "I shan't tell her, though. She's looking at me," he thought, feeling suddenly embarrassed. He took out a pocket knife and half opened it. "He's exactly the same," thought Clarissa. "He has the same odd look, the same cloth, the same clothes. He's a little thinner and drier, perhaps, but he looks awfully well, and just the same as he used to. How heavenly is it to see you again, she cried. He had his knife out. That's so like him, she thought. He had only arrived in London last night, he said. And how was everything? And how was everything? How was everybody? Richard? Elizabeth? And what's all this? He asked, he said, pointing his knife towards her evening dress. He's very well dressed, thought Clarissa, yet he always criticizes me. Here she is, mending a dress, as usual, he thought. All the time. I've been working in India. She's been sitting here, going to parties, running to the House of Commons, and back for Richard. For there is nothing in the world so bad for some women as marriage. And having a husband in politics, he thought, growing more and more annoyed. Richard's very well. He is at a government meeting, said Clarissa. And she picked up her sewing and asked, did he mind her just finishing? Yeah, so there is a mix of direct and indirect speech here, which can be a little bit confusing. And she picked up her sewing and asked, so that's indirect. And then, did he mind her just finishing what she was doing, for they had a party that night? Which I shan't ask you to, she said. My dear Peter, she said, but it was wonderful to hear her say that. My dear Peter. Indeed, it was all so wonderful. The house, the silver candlesticks, the paintings. Why shouldn't she ask him to her party? He asked. Now he's perfectly charming, of course, thought Clarissa. Now I remember how impossible it was to decide. And why did I decide not to marry him that awful summer? But it's so extraordinary that you should have come this morning, she cried. Do you remember, she said, the French windows at Bourton? I do, he said, and he remembered having breakfast alone very awkwardly with her father, who had recently died, and he had not written to her about it. But he had never got on well. With old Justin Harry, Clarissa's father. I often wish I'd got on better with your father, he said, but he never liked anyone who wanted. But he never liked anyone who wanted, liked my friends. Or liked my friends. Okay, said Clarissa, cross with herself. Okay, yeah, sorry. But he never liked anyone who liked my friends, said Clarissa, cross with herself for reminding Peter that he had wanted to marry her. Of course I wanted to, thought Peter, and was overcome with, of course I wanted to, thought Peter, and was overcome with his own sadness, which rose like a pale moon above a garden. It almost broke my heart too, he thought. I was more unhappy than I have ever been since. So this is in his own thoughts. So of course he wanted to marry her, but he doesn't say it. And of course he was heartbroken. I was more unhappy than I have ever been since. And as if he were really sitting in the garden at Bourton with Clarissa, he moved a little towards her, raised his hand, let it fall. She seemed to be sitting with him in the moonlight. Herbert has Bourton now, she said. I never go there now. Then, just like in a moonlit garden, when one person feels embarrassed that he is already bored, while the other still looks sadly at the moon. So Peter felt now. He moved his foot, looked at the furniture, said nothing. For why go back to the past like this? Why make him suffer? Do you remember the lake? She said suddenly, her voice full of an emotion which caught her heart and made her throat stiff. For she was a child, throwing bread to the ducks, standing between her parents. At the same time, she was a grown woman, coming to her parents by the lake, saying, "This is what I've made of my life." And what had she made of it? Sitting there, sewing this morning, was Peter. And what had she made of it? Sitting there, sewing this morning with Peter? She looked at Peter Walsh through tears and dried her eyes. Yes, said Peter. Yes, 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 he said, as if she were bringing something to the surface which hurt him as it rose. Stop, he wanted to cry, for he was not old. His life was not over. Not at all. It was only just past 50. Shall I tell her my news? He thought. But she's too cold. Sitting there sewing, he thought. Daisy would look ordinary beside Clarissa, and she would think me a failure, which I am in the Dalloway's eyes, he thought. Oh yes, he was a failure, compared with all this, the beautiful furniture and the silver and the old English paintings. I hate it, he thought. And this has been going on all the time. Week after week, while and at once his life seemed to spread out before him. Journeys, quarrels, adventures, relationships with women, and work, work, work. He wrapped his fingers around his knife. What an extraordinary habit that was, Clarissa thought. Always playing with a knife, always making one feel silly, shallow, empty-minded. But like a queen whose guards have fallen asleep and left her unprotected, she commended her feelings for the things and people she loved to come to her aid. She commended them all, her life, which Peter hardly knew now, to come and beat off the enemy. Well, and what's happened to you? She said, challenging Peter to the battle. He gathered together all sorts of things, his marriage, which she knew nothing at all about, his relationships, his work in India. Millions and millions of things, he cried. Clarissa sat very upright. I'm in love, he said, as if about to lay down flowers before her in the dark. In love with a girl in India, he said, now speaking rather dryly to Clarissa Dalloway. He had laid down his flowers. Clarissa would make her judgment. In love, she said. How could he be dragged under by that monster at his age? His neck is thin, his hands are red, and he's older than me. But in her heart, she felt he is in love. She sat with her dress on her knee, trembling a little. He was in love. Not with her. With some younger woman, of course. And who is she? She asked. A married woman, unfortunately, he said. The wife of an officer in the Indian army. This is a long chapter today. Okay. And he smiled as he placed Daisy before Clarissa in this foolish way. All the same, he's in love, thought Clarissa. She has, he continued, 2 small children, a boy and a girl. And I have come over to see my lawyers about the divorce. There they are, Daisy and her children, he thought. Do what you like with them, Clarissa. And with each passing second, it seemed to him that his Daisy and her 2 small children became more and more lovely as Clarissa looked at them. The woman must make him feel important, thought Clarissa. Peter had been fooled like that all his life, first marrying a girl he met on the boat out to India, now wanting to marry the wife of an officer in the Indian army. Thank heaven, she had refused to marry him. Still, her old friend, her dear Peter, was in love. But what are you going to do? She asked him. Oh, some lawyers called Hooper and Greatly were going to arrange it, he said, and he actually cut his fingernails with his knife. Oh, leave your knife alone, she cried to herself. She didn't tell him. It had always annoyed her that he did not have the least idea what anyone else was feeling, and how, at his age, how silly. I know who I am up against, thought Peter, running his fingers against his knife. Clarissa and Richard Dalloway and all the rest of them. But I'll show Clarissa. And then, to his complete surprise, he began to cry. Sitting beside her on the sofa, the tears running down his cheeks. And Clarissa had leaned forward, taken his hand, gathered him to her, kissing him. She had actually felt his face on hers before she could control the emotion which rose, then fell, leaving her holding his hand. She felt, as she sat back, extraordinarily light-hearted. And all of a sudden, it came over her. If I had married him, this joy would have been mine all day. It was all over for her. The sheet was stretched and the bed was narrow. Richard, Richard, she cried, calling to him to protect her, as a sleeper in the night wakes and reaches out a hand in the dark. He's lunching with Lady Bourton. Lady Bourton, she remembered. He has left me. I'm alone forever. Forever, she thought, folding her hands on her knee. Peter Walsh had gone to the window and stood with his back to her, blowing his nose, his thin shoulders lifting slightly. Take me with you, thought Clarissa suddenly, as if he were about to leave on some great journey. And then, the next moment, it was as if an exciting play had finished. She had lived a lifetime in it, had run away, had lived with Peter, and now it was over. It was time to move. And as a woman gathers her cloak, her gloves, her bag, and gets up to go out of the theater into the street, she rose from the sofa and went to Peter. And it was awfully strange, he thought, how she still had the power to make the moon, which he hated, rise over the garden at Bourton. Tell me, he said, taking her by the shoulders. Are you happy, Clarissa? Does Richard? The door opened. "Here is my Elizabeth," said Clarissa, emotionally extravagantly, perhaps, extravagantly. "How do you do?" said Elizabeth, coming forward. The sound of Big Ben again, striking the half-hour, rang out between them with extraordinary force. "Hello, Elizabeth," cried Peter, saying goodbye. Clarissa, without looking at her, leaving the room, quickly running downstairs and opening the front door. "Peter, Peter!" cried Clarissa, following him to the top of the stairs. "My party tonight! Remember my party tonight!" she cried over the noise of the traffic and all the clocks striking. And as Peter Walsh shut the front door, her voice crying, "Remember my party tonight," sound very far away. Well, okay, so this is the end of this third part. So part 3 is quite a long chapter between talking about Clarissa and Peter Walsh relationship and Sally Seton. Also, little bling, as we could say, when they were young. I remember where she talks about, where they talked about Sally Seton. Sally Seton, yeah. Okay, so yes, what an interesting topic. Chapter, sorry. Not chapter, once again. What an interesting section of the book. A lot of thinking, a lot of different thoughts coming, direct speech because she's speaking with him, but also well, she's speaking, but they're both speaking to each other, but at the same time we also read about their own thinking, and sometimes direct and indirect speech are in the same sentence, more or less, and it can be a little bit confusing sometimes, but it's an interesting and part of the book, and also we know more about why Peter Walsh is here at Clarissa's house, and we know a little bit more about the past as well, so which is very which gives more information about these characters. And also it's interesting when she talks about her dad. She's mentioning the fact, or they're mentioning the fact that her dad didn't like him very much when they were young, and in brackets then you've got her thinking, well, he actually died, and he didn't even send any flowers or any cards to give his condolences. So that's an interesting intake about the story, and the fact that from an information you've got another thread of information and related to the present. So when they talk about the past, and or some character in the past, then you've got the a new information related to it and to the present. So yeah, fascinating. Well, let me know in the comments what you feel about it, about this new section of the book. And I hope that you enjoyed this live, and thank you for attending again. And thank you for watching this reading as well. And make sure that you subscribe as well to the book club to be part of this literary journey, and have the chance to talk about this novel and practice your English. You're welcome. Love your flower, Kitty. Thank you. Thank you so much for attending this live. I wish you a beautiful afternoon, and see you tomorrow for the reading of section 4. Bye.